Thank you for joining For Our Special Kids, where we openly and honestly discuss the magic and the mess of raising a child with special needs. We are thrilled to have you here and hope this time provides you with some wonder and wisdom. I'm your host, Jennifer Lansing. Let's get started. I am very happy Rupert Isaacson is here with us for today's episode. I will warn you, he jumps right in, talking about the many hats he wears each day. I have another warning for you. This is a 2-episode series. Today, you'll learn about his experiences with the Bushmen, what they taught him about intuitive parenting, how strongly he believes in mentorship, the 3 things Temple Grandin taught him, and a lot more. Next week, he'll get into neuroplasticity and BDNF, shamanism, the horseboy method and its evolution. He'll answer a couple of listener questions, and that's just the beginning. I hope you enjoy and let me know what you think. Rupert Isaacson said to me, "You know me." Well, I think there is some truth to his statement that he feels open and honest with people through his many books, interviews, and seminars. I do believe it's quite difficult to truly know Rupert Isaacson. And while I do feel like I know him better after an hour and 15-minute chat, which I really loved, I hope that our endeavors take us places to explore more knowledge together. So this is what I do know about Rupert. Rupert is well-versed in most things, and he is passionate about all things. His expertise encompasses everything from African culture, the Bushman, land rights and shamanism, to horses, dressage, autism, filmmaking, and book writing. Rupert is an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, an author, artist, craftsman, trainer, educator, a seeker, and a lot more. However, today he is here because he is a father. He has 3 children, one of whom is an autist. I reached out to Rupert after reading Horseboy and The Long Ride Home. So let's just get right into it.
I wear a lot of parallel hats, but they're all somewhat reflections of each other. So none of them operate in conflict with each other. They're all me sort of either doing what I'm interested in or doing what's in front of me that I must do, if that makes sense. And then if I do something that's in front of me that I must do, then I'll try to make it interesting, which means that I'll try to do it along my passions, because then it's more likely to be sustainable, basically.
Sure. You do what I call dabbling. I like to dabble in a lot of things, and then I just make money doing it sometimes.
How about you? How do you do it?
How do I do what?
Yeah, how do you do things and make money?
I follow my intuition, and I didn't know that for a very long time, but I do what feels right. And it's really interesting when I was reading The Horseboy. It was very like that voice in your head where you just knew that you needed to go to Mongolia. Mm-hmm. I get it. It very much resonated with the concept of how I think we should all parent, is just really stepping back and being like, what are the voices telling you? And more importantly, what is my child telling me?
Yeah.
I really try to do that.
I was lucky. I got mentored. I'm a great believer in mentorship. So in terms of parenting, the way I got mentored was I lived on and off for a few years with the Bushmen of the Kalahari. Other people call them the Khoisan, who are the hunter-gatherer tribe peoples of Southern Africa. And they are the first and original human blueprint. They are the oldest DNA that we have it goes back to them, and we all share their DNA. And I got involved because I'm partially, my parents are African and I'm a colonial. And I got involved first as a journalist reporting on their land rights issues. They were being kicked off their land illegally to make way for diamond mines. Mm-hmm. And I found that I had a family connection to a particular group of them, and wrote a book about the adventure that followed called The Healing Land. And I stayed involved first in South Africa with a group there, and then in Botswana till about 2006. So it overlapped with Rowan's diagnosis. And what I'd noticed among the Bushmen, and this is what everybody notices who spends time among them, because you can't not notice it, is that they are probably the most functional human beings you've ever been around. They are just that cool, like all the time. Even when they're not cool, they're cool about how when they're not cool. They're very forgiving to each other. They're very understanding. They don't take it personally. I say, how are these people so cool? You know, that they have complete, gender equality. They have no chiefs. They just have councils of elders who they go to, and they defer to whoever's got the particular experience in that particular field, and so on and so on. Then I realized actually most hunting and gathering cultures in the world are like this, which means that most humans are like this. And I watch them parent. I mean, in the original humans are like this. They don't make war. They don't have sexual violence. It's really interesting. When it started happening to them, they had to borrow other people's words for it because it was sort of outside of their ken. Hunting and gathering societies are not about ownership. They're about pooling collective resources, whether it's physical resources or whether it's intellectual resources or whether it's emotional resources. Okay. So I observed the way that they parented, and it was all very pragmatic. So if you have a baby in a place where everything wants to eat your baby, and you let go this little protein ball, onto the ground, and suddenly all the hyenas and all of the, everything just sniff it. There's no way you're going to put that thing in a crib and let it cry it out, because it will cry because it's like, oh my gosh, the predators are going to come get me. Somebody come, protect me. That's instinct. And of course, the moment it cries, it will attract predators. So no, you hold the child close to your body. You put it between two parents, two adults, because a hyena will easily go into the hut and steal a child without you even knowing it. And it's cold at night, so why would you not give it your body warmth and so on? And then you walk around with the kid on your body because there's things that out there that want to eat it, and you've got to go and do things. And so the child is not only getting unconditional love the whole time, but is included in everything. Because if you're wearing them on your body while you're gathering, while you're tracking, in the last moments of a hunt, no, you're not going to have the child on your body, but the child is still somewhere with the group participating in the hunt. And so the kids from very, very early, as they grow up, they have no idea what it is to not know these things, because they imbibe everything very, very slowly through infancy, and then by childhood, they're meaningful participants. And I remember when Rowan was at his most floating awayness.
Yeah.
The one thing which we did was we were co-sleeping. And I really felt it was the one thing that was keeping us connected. And I don't think I'd have done that had I not spent time among the Bushmen. And then I remember people saying to me, friends of mine in England, which is quite a harsh culture, oh, aren't you worried that he's going to grow up, soft and dependent? I was like, yeah, but listen, these people in Southern Africa that do this at 16, these kids take a spear, go into the wilderness where everything still wants to eat them, and come back with a wildebeest. And then the next year they go down to Johannesburg and get a job in the mines, and they don't even know the language, and they make it work, and then they go back to the bush. So no, I think actually it's the opposite. I think what happens is you build so much resilience this way, emotional resilience, that you don't have these holes to fill like most of the rest of us do, who are left to cry it out as babies. And so for us, one of our earliest pre-memories of for most people in most farming or industrial cultures, not just the West, is of despair. The hyenas are going to come and get me. Mum and dad are going to leave me for the hyenas. And so much of our angst and our neurosis and we don't quite know why we're all so fucked up, but we are. And I bet just comes down to that, something very, very simple like that. That meant, because I'd spent time with them like this, And because I'd also seen their healers at work, and I had noticed, again, like everybody notices when they're down there, when you're around the healers, which is often, that many of the healers, some people call them shamans, um, exhibit neuropsychiatric symptoms.
Yeah.
And the neuropsychiatric symptoms that they display could be autism, epilepsy, schizophrenia, bipolar, are the job qualification. So rather than these things being things that would disqualify them from participation economically, it puts them at the center of things. And because they're deemed to be so spiritually sensitive, they already have a foot in the spirit world, and then they're targeted for sort of formal training by adolescents. People obviously will scoff at that, but the reality is that if there was nothing in it, they'd all be dead, and the culture would have died out, and we wouldn't be here because we're their descendants. And what I mean by that is they get sick like anyone else. They get all the diseases everyone else gets, and they get broken legs, and they get gored by buffalo, and bitten by snakes and whatever. And they will absolutely use Western medicine if they can, but frequently it's just not around. So they have to fall back on their traditional practices, and people get sick and get better. You just see it all the time. They get sick and they get better using these traditional healing practices, which are delivered by people who are basically our special needs kids. So armed with those two things, it was not difficult to follow an intuitive path and to accept mentorship wherever I could find it. So I was mentored by the bushman, even though it was maybe not conscious mentoring. Then when Rome was diagnosed, I thought, well, I need a mentor for this. That has to be an autistic person, an adult who started life nonverbal, incontinent, and who's now sort of made it. Who's that person? That's Dr. Temple Grandin. I need to go talk to her. When she was 3, she was rocking in a corner, wiping her shit on the walls, and they were going to institutionalize her. Now she's a professor of animal sciences, neuroscientist, best-selling author, blah, blah, blah. And I went to her and said, how does my son become you? And she told me to do 3 things, and I did them, and they worked. And then I also allowed my son to mentor me, and I still do. So I'm a great believer in mentorship. Now, intuition comes into that because your intuition has to tell you whether this is a mentor that would be useful or not. But also, you've got to take a punt. You have to take a risk, and maybe they're not, and maybe you have to go find somebody else. Because I tried plenty of therapies that didn't work. But that's okay, because they learn about them, and you add that to your knowledge base. And just because they didn't work for you doesn't mean they wouldn't work necessarily for somebody else. And you build up your sort of library of sort of technology around the issue that you're dealing with your child. And then you get to a point, as you have, where you have knowledge to share, and then you share it. And in our case, it became a method, several methods actually, which are now practiced, in different countries. But it all happened really through the seeking out of mentorship.
I need more mentors. So let's talk about how the early years with Rowan went. What have you learned, etc.?
You're going through so much stress. And the reason one is going through so much stress is that it's very, very recent that anybody has been giving any attention to this. I mean, 15 years ago, when my son was in stages, even then things were not as far ahead as they are now. If you go back 5 years before that, no. And so people still thought, oh, this is something you can look at medically, or this is something that you can look at from a psychoanalysis type of view, or psychologist type of view, or behavioral point of view. And while there might be a medical element with a particular child, or there might be a psychological element with a particular child, or there might be a behavioral element with a certain child, it's none of those things. It's a way of being. It's a way of being that's perfectly viable. That's why therapy doesn't work, because you're trying to fix something that doesn't need fixing, and that will always explode. So for example, if I had gone to Temple Grandin, who stims and acts pretty autistic when she's not in her public persona, and goes off on rambling, circular, repetitive things and so on, and she knows she does, you know, if I'd gone into her office and said, "Oh, you clearly need therapy to be not who you are," well, that would have been the end of the interview. But the fact is, she sold more books than I have. She's got a PhD. I don't. She's much more successful in many ways than I will ever be. She's revolutionized the livestock industry by making slaughterhouses less stressful for animals. Clearly, autism is kind of all right, actually. Yes, there are challenges and skills to be learned. So I liken it much more to, like me living in Germany now. Ich muss Deutsch lernen. Ich lerne Deutsch aber langsam. I'm learning it slowly. Aber wenn ich kann endlich, finally, Deutsch fließend sprechen, when I become really fluent, I will still remain a Brit. I'll just be a Brit that speaks German. You know, it's the same. So you can be autistic and learn these skills to swim in the shark-infested waters of the neurotypical world. But there's nothing wrong with being autistic.
So I'm going to challenge you a little bit because this is something that I love it that you brought this up. Okay. Because I was really struggling in your writing. I didn't warn you that I'm really honest. I struggled because, and I get kind of emotional. Damn it. Sorry. I struggled because I felt like it took you a long time to come to the realization in your writing, at least, that said, yeah, I don't need to fix Rowan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think every parent has to go through, I mean, particularly back then, because less was known about it. Every parent who goes through that thing of realizing, fuck, okay, I'm now a special needs parent. Okay.
Yeah.
Has to give up on a bunch of dreams that they didn't even know they had.
Yeah.
And there is a grieving process with that. You're also being told lots of things by lots of people, whether or not they ring true with you intuitively. You're like, oh shit, well, these people seem to know more than me. I've got to do this and I've got to do this and I've got to go. I think for most people that takes a couple of years. I mean, we
yes.
work with so many families. I'd say, you know, horse boy method, movement method, Athena, that's our other thing. We probably serve, I'm not exaggerating, we probably serve over 300,000 families a week now, I would say. Not us personally, but through people that we train. And I would say that the vast majority of parents have to go through that. But if you think about it, the vast majority of parents, whether they're special needs parents or not, have to spend a couple of years just getting used to being a parent.
It's being a parent. And,
yeah. It's actually going to be, it's a bit serious. Oh shit, you know.
Yeah, and it's totally different than what they all tell you to do.
Exactly. So
I just to kind of interrupt you, like I was just emotionally feeling like, oh, but it's true. Every single parent, me included, had a complete grief period. And there are still times. I mean, hello, my daughter is magical and incredible, and I talk about her all the time, but I still go to bed at night and cry sometimes. You know, I still ache for what may not be.
Well, it probably will be, actually, but you have to accept. What you have to do is have to give up all attachment to it, in order to allow it to happen in the way that it's going to happen. Yeah. But that is a bumpy fucking process. Yeah, sure. Because life, if you hadn't noticed, is a bit of a bumpy process. And luckily, you know, people like you and I have children that are healers who tend to come in and sort of say, listen, mum, listen, dad, stop being such a drama queen. It's really okay.
You know nothing. Exactly. Yeah. You know nothing.
But it'll be all right. You know, look at me, I'm okay. It'll be all right.
Yeah.
But where it's scary as a parent, for sure, is, you know, I'm a stupid hippie who never thought about money, who never thought about that sort of thing, structures. And I realized, man, I'm going to have to leave behind structures after I die for my son. No matter how able he gets, and he's very able now, it's amazing. He'll always be vulnerable. He'll always have a naivety and a vulnerability. And I will need to do what I can to mitigate that. But at the same time, if I look at my own dad, he probably looks at, he looks at me and thinks the same thing. And he's right. So it's no more than any parent goes through, but because the stakes are higher, it's more intense. It's like parenting cubed or parenting squared or something like that. And then it's a lonely path because every special needs parent finds themselves to some degree in isolation, even if they belong to all these online groups and go to these things and they join the local autism society, or they do whatever they do. It's so particular and so unique in each case. And a lot of people, particularly in the early days when the kids are not able to blend in that much and very rigid and not compromising because of their sensory issues and so on, people don't want to hang out. We say, hey, do you want to go hang out with me again in the splash pool or on the trampoline? People are like, well, I'd love to, but do something else. Yeah. So it's not like you're taking them to Little League, but after a while you get used to that, and then as you know, you begin to see the magic in that, actually, the sort of special solitude and the reflective time and the time to really think about it all, which you might not have quite so much with a neurotypical child. And I sort of know that a bit because my two youngest children are, as far as I can tell, neurotypical. The way one gets involved in their lives is very different, and you can get involved in a sort of a busyness. But none of this makes the special needs experience for a parent easy, but it is amazing at the same time. It is amazing.
So, Rupert, I'm going to have you step back and just tell people in a snippet about the journey, if it's okay with you, that took you to Mongolia. And if you don't mind, for those people that really don't know what shamanism is, you mentioned that early in our conversation. I know you wrote the book a long time ago, but I'm sure it feels pretty much like yesterday at some point.
Yeah, sure.
I'd love just a little insight on that.
All right. Well, what happened was when my son was diagnosed, like I said, we were trying various therapies and they didn't work. Particularly behavioral therapy. It like so didn't work. It actually made things much worse. And my son was trying to climb out through the wall whenever the ABA people were trying to work with him. And I remember saying to them, I'm a horse trainer. And if I'm in a round pen with a horse and he's trying to leave the round pen and climb over the fence, surely I need to change something about it.
Yes. And you were very clear about that in the book too. It was great.
Yeah. And they were like, they were so aggressive. And I was like, well, if you've got to be that aggressive, that means you're really being defensive. And if you feel you've got to defend what you do when it's clearly not working, then sorry, but you're full of shit. But I don't have an alternative. So that's why I went to look for mentorship, Dr. Temple Grandin. So the 3 things she told me to do: follow the child, do your stuff outside, and let them move, which were the 3 things that the ABA therapists were not doing, basically. And I said, can you explain in a bit more detail what you mean? And she said, yeah. She said, follow the child is actually 3 things itself. Follow the child means follow them physically. You've got to be there to observe, because they're not going to tell you what they want to do. They're just going to go do it. And then you've got to go look at how they do it and begin to see patterns and look for when it's happy, look for when it's engaged, and try to engage with and see what they're really motivated by. I said, well, that makes sense. And then she said, you've got to follow them emotionally. And I said, well, that's intriguing. What do you mean by that? And she said, well, Rupert, that's about sensory issues, really. You've noticed that your kid has tantrums seemingly out of the blue, and other times seems to be extremely happy, seemingly out of the blue, but it's not out of the blue. Speaking as an autistic person, it's always to do with a sensory thing. And autistic people, I'm quoting her, we have, oversensitive nervous systems and an overactive amygdala, the part of the brain that governs fight, flight, and freeze. So therefore, whenever we get a negative sensory trigger, it's insupportable for us, especially in the early years. We learn to be more resilient later. And it melts us down. And here's a tip, Rue. Most of the negative sensory triggers are man-made. So some known ones would be fluorescent strip lighting, industrial cleaning solvent smell, loud machine noise, the hum of an air conditioner, things like this. And so if you can begin to notice among those things when he seems better or worse, the worst things try to eliminate from your home at the very least. And I said, well, that's intriguing to me, but how does that help him to cope with those things if he's not exposed to them? He said, well, he's going to be exposed to them a lot actually out there in the real world. But if you give him a haven where he cannot be exposed to them, then he will build resilience because he'll have a chance to build up his reserves again. He won't just be constantly flattened by them. I said, well, that makes sense. Actually, that's like soldiers on the front line pulling them off for R&R. I get that. Okay. And she said, yeah, most of the good sensory triggers happen to be natural nature, because guess what? The human organism is pre-programmed to be in a certain environment. That is nature, because we're part of it. So if we're in non-natural environments, there's always a certain degree of stress on our system. Okay, so I got that. And then she said, you need to follow him intellectually. And I said, well, that's interesting, because we're dealing with a not really verbal 3-year-old here. We're not having discussions about the finer points of Nietzsche at this point. What do you mean by intellectual? She said, it's about the passionate interests. See what they get obsessed by, even if it seems to make no sense to you, like lining up toys, like squinting at something and flapping while they do it, like endlessly watching the same movie over and over again, or endlessly watching the same 1.5-minute clip of the same movie over and over again, and start looking what's in there, what's in that clip. Analyze the whole thing, break it down, become a journalist, become a sleuth, and you'll find it all gets quite interesting, and then begin to recognize patterns. She said, here's another thing most people don't know. The stims that the behavioral therapists are trying to stop because they're saying they're inappropriate social behaviors, the flapping, all of that stuff. He said, no, that's the key to the intellect. You've got to be able to encourage them so you can observe them. Because she said, if it's a very repetitive sort of a stim, pattern based, you're basically dealing with a math science brain. And if it's a more exploratory stim, you're basically dealing with a arts storytelling brain. I thought only somebody autistic could tell you that, right? That this is totally good. And so the do it outside stuff is about the good sensory triggers. There's less bad ones out in nature, and let them move. Well, most kids in general, most people in general, but certainly people with neuropsychiatric stuff, are kinetic learners. They learn through movement. And so this all made perfect sense, So I went back, and Rome was in another one of these ABA sessions. And I said to the very bitchy ABA lady, look, I just went to talk to the world's most famous autistic person, and she told me to do these things. Let's do them. That seems to me rational. And immediately a sort of wall of negativity. So I was like, okay, enough. And I just opened the door, because that's who he's trying to get through the door. And the door led into the woods. And he goes in the woods, but he wants to put stuff in his mouth. And you've got someone with autism, autoism. Auto is the Greek word for the self. Selfism, locked within the self. Difficulty is communication, relationship with the exterior world. Last thing I wanted to do was say, no, stop doing that. Stop, because that's shutting down communication from someone that doesn't really even want to communicate. So I'm not making it worth the person's while to communicate with me. That's like me if I'm trying to learn German. If someone's telling me to shut up all the time when I'm trying to speak German,
you're not doing it right. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds horrible. Stop it.
Exactly. Yeah. Making mistakes. I, luckily, having lived with the Bushmen, knew that most of what you see in most ecosystems in the world, about 60 to 80% of it is edible. So I very quickly got online and learned the 10 most obvious plants behind, in the woods behind our house. And we began foraging together. And immediately the whole dynamic shifted. We had science, we had discovery, we had exploration, we had fun, we had, and it was in the course of one of these foraging expeditions that he noticed my neighbor's quarter horse mare, Betsy. One of the ironies of the story is that I, as a professional horseman, was keeping my son away from horses because I thought he wasn't safe around them. And indeed, he wasn't really, not around horses that were not desensitized to that kind of behavior. Now, in the methods that we use for therapeutic riding, we know how to desensitize horses to that. Your average sport horse, will freak out if a kid gets under him and yanks on his willy or something, absolutely. Anyway, he runs and he throws himself under her hooves, gets under this before I can grab him. So then I have to go very still because I don't want to spook her, don't want her to be trampled. And I see her do something amazing. She modifies her behavior. she modifies her behavior immediately and spontaneously, and pushes with her nose the other three horses away, and then bends her head to him and touches him with her nose, and something passes between them. And I, as a horseman, could see this and see that she had changed her behavior. And then thought, wow, decades as a horseman, clearly I know much less about horses than I thought. And then he wanted to go back day after day to her, and then he would go next to her with his arms like this, putting his arms up. So I put him on her back. All of the really agitated behaviors went away. He just lay on her. I kept a hand on him so that he wouldn't fall if she moved or twitched. And I knew this mare. I knew she was very quiet. I'd known this horse for a while. And so I thought, oh, well, I don't understand why he's so calm, but he is. This is interesting. I haven't seen him this calm before. What would happen if I were to ride with him? Now, this is in Texas. So Texas, you know, all the kids grew up in front of mum and dad in a big old Western saddle. That's how they learned to ride. So I thought, okay, let's give it a try. So I went to my neighbor. He said, sure. Put him in the saddle in front of me. And he had some echolalia at this point, but no real expressive speech. Echolalia, for those listeners that don't know what it is when a kid will repeat some stuff that they've heard. Could be an advertising jingle or a bit of a Thomas the Tank Engine video or something, but they can't say, "Mummy, I love you," or "Mummy, I'm hungry," "Mummy, I'm thirsty," or "Mummy, I need the toilet," whatever. It's not expressive speech, really. Anyway, we're riding downhill towards a pond, and a big blue heron got up and flapped away. And he said, "Heron." I didn't know he knew that word. I was like, he's talking. He's talking. He's talking. Wow. Okay. And I noticed very quickly that the rhythm that the horse was in made a difference to how much or how little speech I got. And the more the horse was in what horsemen call collection, which is the sort of dancey movements that you see sort of in what people call dressage, etc., the more I got. This was interesting. Didn't know why. Okay, great. I'll go with it. It's better than a kick in the face, you know. Another irony is that that was the same week that his speech therapist gave up on him. So I don't think this point. Yeah, I'm like, don't worry, I've got a new therapist.
I've got this. She's amazing.
And she's got this amazing skill. She can take her shit while running and not get any of it on her legs. Can you do that?
I can do that?
I've been trying for years. Yeah. She's clearly a master, you know. So anyway, I will sit at the feet of this master. So I lived in the saddle with him for some years, but in that first year, I thought his speech really came. So I thought, well, if speech, what about reading? So following his interests, for example, he was obsessed with The Lion King. So we're singing all the Lion King songs endlessly up there. So I started painting letters on trees. Meanwhile, we're learning the species of tree. Each of these letters, when you put them together over about a 500-yard ride, would come together to form the name of, like, say, Simba or something like that. And there'd be a little Simba toy waiting for him at the end of the last tree. He flat out learned to read. And so I could take books up there and stuff. I thought, well, what about numbers then? So I started getting friends and family to line up in front of us. One wears a silly hat. They have to go. How many have we got left? You do it with farts to make it funny. Then, you know, you add them back together again, and then you charge at them and they run screaming into two groups so you can divide them. You know, 6 divided by 2, you get 2 groups of 3, and then you round them up, you know, like a cowboy. And he got his arithmetic. So then I thought, all right, is it just him or is it other kids too? So we started running unofficial play dates at our little farm, you know, just to partly also to get a bit of a social life going for him. Very quickly, I noticed, universal response. Okay, not just with the autistic kids, but also, interestingly, with their neurotypical siblings. They started really learning stuff this way. This time I had to kind of start homeschooling because the local schools, what they offered was, you know, not good. So I started just adapting the national curriculum to first being on the horse and then thinking, well, but these rhythms that he's in, these movements that the horse, and what if I emulated them with swings or on my shoulders or on a trampoline? And so it seems to be all about swinging the hips. I found that if I did that, I could pretty much transmit information, including maths and things. So this is really, really interesting. So then I went to neuroscientists, again, mentorship, and said, please, can you explain what's going on? And I went back to Temple Grandin, because she's also a neuroscientist, not just an animal behavioralist. And I also went to a guy called Dr. Robert Navio at the University of California, who runs the Mitochondrial Institute in San Diego, someone at the Sorbonne in France, at the Marie Curie Institute, and a couple of others. What was interesting is I got the same answer from all of them.
Tune in next week to find out what Rupert learned from the neuroscientists. Thanks for your patience. This was a really long interview, and next week it's even better. Have a good one. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found one or two meaningful nuggets of information to make your day better. If you think there's value in what we do, please take a moment to tell another friend, family member, or a caregiver. We'd love to hear from you at forourspecialkids@gmail.com. You can send in a question, a comment, a topic that you'd like to learn more about, or if you'd like us to highlight a certain person, please send that information to us. It makes our show so much better and so much more valuable for you. Our Facebook and Instagram handle is For Our Special Kids. And finally, remember to witness the wonder and the wisdom within yourself and others. Until next time.